I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Absolute Superman by Jason Aaron and Rafa Sandoval is the lead singer of Kill Me Kate, returning guest, Ralph Puma. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for having me read this, because I don't get to read as many comics as much anymore, but if there's a purpose, I'm in.
Awesome. No, I'm so happy to have you here. I always love when we can connect, and I just had an instinct based on our years of friendship and the podcast discussions that we have had that this would be a good fit for you. And I'm glad that that proved to be the case.
Yeah. What made you think of me for this one?
I don't know that I can really put my finger on it. It was just sort of an instinctive sort of thing.
All right.
But I'm glad it worked out. So we're here to talk about Absolute Superman, and we are focusing on issues 1 through 14. So at a convention a while back, writer Jason Aaron had said that issue 14 marked the conclusion of the first major story arc. So I felt like this would be a good time to check in with the series. Because, you know, it hasn't happened often, but every now and then I get a little burned. I think specifically back a couple of years ago when I wanted to cover the Warworld saga in Action Comics by writer Philip Kennedy Johnson. And at the time, both he and DC, they were being kind of cagey about how long Warworld saga was going to last. And it got to the point where I was like, well, I want to talk about it. I want to do an episode on something that's timely. And it seemed like, hey, we might be in this territory for a while. So I'm like, all right, let's just talk about what's out so far. And sure enough, we did the episode, and then like the next arc ended up being the end of the Warworld saga. And I'm like, God damn it, I would have just waited. So I'm always a little bit wary, and I always want to make sure we have enough where we can look at more or less a complete story. And I feel like that's what we have here. So I guess you've already answered this. You were not reading this as it was coming out over the past year plus, but you read it for this episode.
Yes. And so I've been keeping up on solicits, and I read a couple issues of the Absolute. Like I read all of the first issues just to kind of, get an idea of what's happening. And it's all been really exciting. And I'm fascinated by the Martian Manhunter one, and everything in the Absolute universe just seems so like new and exciting and interesting. And I love those little tweaks of characters and how they're going to fit them into their own little corners of this new universe.
Yeah, man. So we have this new reimagining of Superman. And to your point, not just Superman. We also have other titles like Absolute Batman and Absolute Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter and Flash and Green Lantern and Green Arrow and so on. Yeah. And this is part of DC's All-In publishing initiative. I don't know if you read the All-In special a while back.
Yes.
Oh, you did? Okay, right on.
Yep.
As I did as well. And I'll probably have more to say on that when we talk about KO not too long from now. I really want to focus us on Absolute Superman specifically. But just as a little bit of recap and context for the audience, the gist of it is that while the DCU is infused with Superman energy, as Scott Snyder describes it, the Absolute universe is infused with Darkseid energy or Omega energy. And so Darkseid's essence reshaped the Elseworld, the home of the Absolute universe, and kind of turned everything on its head and repositioned the heroes of that world as the underdogs. They're not the status quo. Now they're the disruptors, and they have all of these new challenges to overcome. So if we go back to the initial announcement and the first wave of solicitations for these books, for Batman, it was without the mansion, without the money, without the butler, what's left is the absolute dark night. For Wonder Woman, without the island paradise, without the sisterhood that shaped her, without a mission of peace, what's left is the absolute Amazon. And for our episode here, without the fortress, without the family, without a home, what's left is the absolute Man of Steel. Do you feel like that's an effective tagline for this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What about you? Do you think that it like captures everything as it is, or do you feel like there are replacements of those things throughout that he still managed to find?
Yeah, probably the latter. I think that tagline is apt, at least at the outset. But yeah, I think your point is well taken. But yeah, I mean, this is a Superman who grew up on Krypton and spent many years there before its destruction and his arrival on Earth. How old do you estimate he was when Krypton exploded?
I think he must have been about 12 or 13.
That's what I was thinking.
You know, I think we meet him maybe at like 10, because he does feel a little bit younger when we first encounter him, but he's got to be early teens, because by the time he's, you know, Supermaning it up, he's on that cusp of being Superman. He's still Superboy to me visually, though, until the very, very end, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I estimated, maybe 12 or 13. We know he spends, I guess, about a year and a half-ish traveling through space. And then he's on Earth for about 5 years before we catch up with him at the start of that first issue. So late teens, early 20s is sort of the Superman we're dealing with here. But yeah, this is a Superman, or Kal-El, who grew up on Krypton and spent much more time on Krypton than we typically see, and has a much shorter stay with the Kents in Smallville than we typically see. So we get a bit of an inversion of that. And we don't have the typical Metropolis Daily Planet setting and the Fortress of Solitude. We do ultimately meet new versions of Lois and Jimmy and Lana Lang and whatnot. But still, we're devoid of those typical trappings of the character. And we see as things proceed from there. But yeah, this is a Kal-El without a home, darker, lonelier, angrier, trying to keep his rage in check. I feel like there's an emotional thrust or arc over the issues that we looked at. That's key to it.
Well, I don't want to I don't think it's in response to Snyder stuff at all, but I feel like one of the major questions of this story, devoid of Snyder stuff, is it worth it to kill your enemy? Is it worth it to kill the people who are poisoning the world? Is it worth it to take that step? And I think that's one of the biggest questions of this story. And I think from the beginning through the end, it's one of the bigger through lines that he's asking himself. He witnesses what his parents do with that, question. He asks it when he sees Jor-El do it. He asks it when he sees Lara do it. He's constantly battling with this, how do I feel about this concept of killing another?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully people recognize that we'll be discussing spoilers here, but just in case, please let this be your spoiler warning. We'll be talking about those first 14 issues. I have a bunch of comments and questions from our patrons that I'll sprinkle in, some really thoughtful comments that I think will help guide us along here. And we were talking off mic, and I think it's already clear from what you've shared so far, but you were a fan of this run so far?
I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like candy. I started reading it, and an hour later I was through it and had all my notes, and I knew exactly what I felt about it.
Right on. Yeah, I will say, well, first of all, I do want to express gratitude to the audience, because I have had over the past year and change, more people ask about whether and when we were going to cover this than probably anything else.
Wow.
And the fact that people care what we have to say about all of this is extremely gratifying. I really appreciate it. So thank you to everyone who has expressed interest, and hopefully we deliver here in this episode as we break it all down. I've made no secret of the fact, historically, I've not been the biggest fan of Elseworld type stories. Like, I get their appeal and I get why people like them, but typically they haven't done a ton for me. And I think sort of where I've always landed is we all recognize the importance of the upbringing on the part of Jonathan and Martha Kent in terms of shaping who Superman turns out to be. And so when we upend that in these Elseworld type stories, to me, it always feels like, well, I don't know how much this is really saying. It's like, of course, if you remove him from that environment, he's going to be something different. I think I had a little bit of a breakthrough a while back. DeVoe and I did an episode years ago now on Red Sun.
Yep.
And I think what I recognized there, and this might be the most obvious thing in the world to you and to other audience members, but it sort of clicked for me where, okay, we recognize the nature and the nurture of the story and of the character. So if we are changing in ways large or small, the nurture part of it, if Kal-El doesn't land in Smallville, Kansas and is not raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent, like, how does he turn out? And so I think those types of stories then allow you to really hone in on the nature side, right? Like if you're changing the nurture aspect, well, what's left? What are those kind of core intrinsic attributes of the character that are going to be present or going to manifest in some way, shape, or form if you change the environment that he's brought up in? And I think that opened things up for me a little bit and allowed me to access stories like Red Son and honestly something like this. So I think I was way more primed for Absolute Superman now than I probably would have been a few years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the way they sold it too at the beginning, that you know what you're getting, you know what they're taking away. And I think that prepares fans, like even the most continuity, you know, intense person will be able to at least go, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. You know?
Absolutely. At the same time, look, full disclosure, when I read that initial press release and that solicitation, like no fortress, no family, no home, I'm like, well, those are all the things that make him Superman. What is this? So I was still a little skeptical, but I heard nothing but great things over this past year. I was not reading it as it was coming out. I was waiting until we had this big chunk to really dive into and talk about. I will say I really overall enjoyed it a lot. And there were certain aspects, especially the depiction of Krypton and the effect that you see Superman have on those around him and the golden age ethos of Superman being this champion of the oppressed.
Yep.
Fighter for the downtrodden. That all really, really resonated. There were certain aspects like the Ra's al Ghul of it all that didn't really blow me away necessarily. Yep. But Krypton, the effect of Superman and him being that champion of the oppressed, really, really resonated. So I would say if I really had to highlight, those aspects that really sang for me, it would be those.
Yeah. Most of the Superman stories you get, like Red Sun was great because it was Superman. You got to see Superman in that alternate timeline. A lot of these alternate universes are characters like Homelander, or like, or Invincible. You get all of these other like variations on Superman. But what I really liked about this was at its core, it was still, regardless of if he has the name, it was still Clark. It was still Kal-El. It was still Superman. And all of the questions he grappled with were all of those things that all of these other versions take away from, they do it anyway, but he actually, Jason Aaron wrote, he must have written out like, okay, does Superman kill? Does Superman do this? And kind of took all of those various versions of these evil versions or these, turned on its head versions of Superman. And he like almost systematically answered those questions of like, no, this is actually like, if you were to take all that away, here he is. And it's still your guy.
Yeah. Although I guess it's funny when you say like it still felt like Superman. I don't know how to put this, and I don't know if this will make sense. Yes, there were some core qualities that to me still felt like Superman, but when we siphon off the Clark Kent side of the equation to the extent that we do, it's something different. It's not bad, and I still enjoyed it. But I really sort of put it in its own category. Like I didn't so much have that sense of like, oh yeah, like this is Superman.
Yeah.
But it was fun. Like, I'm not saying that as a negative. Like, I think that kind of helped me enjoy it more because I could really just sort of appreciate it for what it is. And yes, undeniably, there are certain qualities that I would typically associate with the character that were still there. But that's kind of how it shook out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say, we gave the spoiler warning, but this whole arc also is about finding Clark, I would say, and discovering that there is a Clark and, finding him along the way. But I think, you're this entire time you're getting red-eyed Superman almost. You're getting, him at his most frustrated in the points of his comics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I don't know how much plot recap we need to do necessarily, in part because I feel like this is something that people have been consuming and probably have the context for what we're talking about. But as far as basic setup and the world that Kal-El finds himself on here, on the one hand, we have the Lazarus Corp, this huge multinational corporation that seems to have its hooks in all aspects of society, run as we find out by Ra's al Ghul. We also have Brainiac, a new version of Brainiac as part of the equation here, working with /for Ra's al Ghul. We have another contingent in the form of the Omega Men, led by Primus, who, spoiler alert, turns out to be Talia, working in cahoots with Ra's al Ghul. And both the Omega Men and the Lazarus Corp, and Ra's specifically, are really working to push Kal to embrace his bloodlust, to give in to that rage, because Ra's wants Superman, Kal, to be his son, the son of the demon, to sort of embrace this role. And along the way, as I was alluding to earlier, we do meet iterations of Lois, who's working for the Lazarus Corp at the beginning of the story, and Jimmy, who's part of the Omega Men. And of course, Lois and Jimmy and Kal all will work together as the story progresses. And I think to your point, as far as finding those kind of core underlying qualities and that sense of familiarity, Lois, I think this is a perfect encapsulation of that, where typically the Brainiac quote unquote algorithm will produce an after action report after a battle. But Lois has this instinct, just like the instinct I had to have you on this episode, Ralph, has this instinct to put it in her own words. And so we see Lois's after battle report.
It was such a good moment.
Right?
It was such a good moment.
Yeah. So things like that. So like I said, I think that's sort of the basic setup here. And I have, as I mentioned before, a bunch of comments and questions from our patrons. And I'm going to start sprinkling in a couple here because they actually relate to what we've already been hitting on. So our pal Duncan says, I think what they got right here was there was no threat that this version of Superman was ever going to replace the version we've been reading all these years. It's far easier to enjoy a new take without the baggage. And I think that's a very key distinction between, from a publishing perspective, between the Absolute universe, the Absolute line, versus something like the New 52. Now, because you joined me for a great discussion about the New 52 Superman. I've really come around on New 52 Superman. There's a lot about it I've come to enjoy, some stories that I think really hold up. But at the time, when that was the Superman, and there were certain changes, the undoing of the marriage, the killing of the Kens, I just couldn't get behind. And I was made to buy into this being the Superman and not knowing what, if any, exit ramp there was ever going to be for it. Here, the fact that it's coexisting with the mainline Superman, and that it's part of this larger all-in story that's being told, I think just makes it, for those of us who are into the continuity of it all and all of that, like, I think it just makes it a lot easier to say, okay, we can enjoy this alongside the other. So I think that's a huge piece of this.
For sure. I think if they did another New 52, I think there would be riots. I don't think people could handle it again. I need new readers, sure. Oh, something new, exciting. I don't need to worry about all this other stuff. But if they were to say, this is the Absolute universe now, I mean, that would not go over well again.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess kind of on a similar note, talking about how this compares to past publishing initiatives, not just at DC. This is from our pal Jan, who says, "My favorite comic book of all time is the original run of Ultimate Spider-Man. I think that was a perfect update of the character, and its longevity allowed an entire generation of readers to become fans of Spider-Man, myself included. I think many would say that run is the definitive Spider-Man run, or at least a top 4 run. Now, obviously, Absolute Superman is a different animal. It makes bigger changes to Superman and is more explicitly a reinvention, whereas I'd describe Ultimate Spider-Man as more of a distillation. But do you think Absolute Superman has the potential to be remembered as one of the defining Superman runs in the same way Ultimate Spider-Man is?"
Ooh, Jan, that's a tough one. Ultimate Spider-Man kind of kept to the roots of Spider-Man, like pretty close. They updated. He was more modern. The Uncle Ben, and they were younger. There's little tweaks. This is such a departure that it's not like you can point at this and say, here's, if you want to know who Superman is, here's this story. I don't think that can be done with Absolute Superman.
I agree. And our other pal, Brian Dempsey, feels the same because he offered a bit of a counterpoint here. Brian says, "The obvious comparison constantly made is the Absolute Universe is DC's version of the Ultimate Universe. I respectfully disagree. The original Ultimate Universe did 3 things. It created a jumping on point like Marvel had not offered before. It modernized the origins of the characters, and it existed completely independently of the main Marvel universe. Yet you could read those first story arcs of each and then pick up the 616 stories and feel like you're reading the same characters. DC isn't doing that at all. The Absolute Universe is a byproduct of a major crossover. It is not intended to exist permanently separately, and that's not a secret. And it's not a modern retelling of anyone's origin. By that I mean DC has rebooted a few times, and their top-selling characters already have multiple modern retellings. In my opinion, these stories wouldn't work in a vacuum. They give the perception of independent stories in a, forgive me, pocket universe, but they are designed more like Elseworlds. Look, what if this happened instead? It's like you need to know the main continuity to appreciate the look what we did with these characters approach to the Marvel Universe. I can see some people loving that and others not." Overall, I agree with Brian in the sense that, yes, I think there's a pretty clear line we can draw between Absolute and Ultimate. But I guess I don't necessarily agree as far as these not being able to exist independently. And I guess I say that because I read this independently. Yes, I have a general sense of what DC is doing with All In and KO and all of that. But I haven't read any of the other Absolute books yet. I will, and we'll be covering them on the Patreon show down the line. So we're going to get into all the Absolute stuff. But for me, for right now, I just read Absolute in a vacuum, and it worked for me. So yeah,
same. I mean, as someone who I'm very loosely keeping up with comics and doesn't, I'm not as much into it as I was when I was reading almost every week, 30 something books, whatever I would pick up. I'm not there anymore, but I've been reading tons of sci-fi. I've been reading tons of, one-off comic books, and reading this was the same as reading a punk rock Jesus. It's like a standalone graphic novel that if someone was like, I want to get into comic books, this is one that I might offer up, because this does everything I love about comic books as the genre of things to read really well.
Funny you bring up that last point, because Brian's questions then, after he makes his argument about the Ultimate Universe, he says, "My questions here are, if you knew someone who loved the new Superman movie or just watched the first 2 seasons of My Adventures with Superman, would you suggest these first 2 arcs?" Now, Brian didn't elaborate, but I'm reading this as, would I recommend this to someone who is not a comics reader or not a Superman comics reader, but they like the movie, they liked My Adventures with Superman?
Yeah.
For me, no, I would not start someone. I would not start someone with this. And certainly not coming off of the Superman movie or My Adventures with Superman. I don't know what they would need to tell me they liked Superman-wise for me to say, you need to start with this. Yeah. But no, this would not be my initial go-to for somebody.
I would say yes to someone who likes My Adventures with Superman. I would say no to someone who wanted the movie. I think My Adventures, if they're coming from it from that perspective, either as like a fan of someone who likes anime or who liked kind of the action orientedness of My Adventures, I think that this would be a nice companion piece of like, oh, here's some more Superman. This is one of my favorites. It's not directly connected, but it's kind of like My Adventures with Superman, where it's close enough to the main stories.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. And then Brian also asks, if you knew someone who loved Superman but had dropped the titles for whatever reason, would you recommend Absolute Superman?
I would give this to them and be like, do you see what they're doing in the main line of Superman right now? Just to mess with them.
I was saying this to you off mic, and I'll say it here now. I'm so happy that so many people seem really taken with Absolute Superman. That's awesome. If people are excited about Superman in any way, shape, or form, I'm there for it. And you look at the sales charts, and the Absolute books have been dominating. Batman especially, with Scott Snyder leading the charge.
Well, they got the excitement. They're pulling not just from DC fans. They're pulling from Marvel fans. They're pulling from people who are interested. It is such a smart initiative, and it's exciting, and people love Batman going as violent as possible always. And I would love the magic elements of Wonder Woman, so that kind of drew me to that. And so I get it. I get why it's so big.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Yeah, I get it, and I'm happy that it's been so successful. And I feel like it's one of those things. I imagine DC feels similarly, like a rising tide lifts all ships. Like the fact that people are going to the comic shops, they're picking up these Absolute books. The trades seem to be selling really well. I mean, I see photos from some of the comic shops that I'm friendly with, and there's like stacks and stacks of these Absolute trades. It's like, that's great. I guess where I feel there's a little bit of tension that I'm experiencing is that I happen to be quite fond of what's going on in the main books. And I'll cite specifically, once again, the Superboy stories in Action Comics by Mark Waid and Skylar Patridge. And it's like, these really beautiful, poignant coming-of-age stories that put a different spin on what you typically get, because we haven't had modern Clark as Superboy comic book stories. So it feels fresh in that sense, yet still has those traditional trappings of the character. So I feel like it's something a little bit different if you're looking for that, but still feels inherently Superman. And so I just feel like we can enjoy both, you know, and I guess I would say, and I don't know if how much this even applies to people listening to this podcast. They may very well be reading everything, but I guess I would say for people whose Superman diet, comic book wise, consists exclusively of Absolute, why are you not checking out the other books? And I don't say that in a accusatory way. Like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, why not? Have you tried them? If not, would you be open to it? Because I feel like there's great stuff that's going on in the books. And while I think there are some really, really interesting choices in Absolute Superman, it's still this departure from the traditional mythology. And for people who now have that as kind of their only conception of Superman, I feel like it's just a little off to me. So I guess I would love, and maybe this is happening, and I hope that it is, where people are kind of getting maybe interested in Superman because of Absolute, and then maybe kind of widening their palette a little bit, whether it's the current books or they're going to the books that are on every top 10 list of Superman stories. And I hope that's the case. I guess the thing that, I don't even want to say frustrates me, but the thing that would make me a little bit sad is if this is kind of as far as people go. It just, as someone who loves all kinds of Superman stories, I want to jump back to Jan here. I think this is a hot take, but all right. So Jan says, woohoo, Absolute Superman is my favorite Superman title right now, and I cannot wait to hear your thoughts. For me, this series combines a ton of ideas from other recent reimaginings of Superman and does all of them a bit better. This will get me in trouble, he says. It's a better version of the more grounded and tragic Superman of the Snyder films. It's a better version of Superman as a working class hero than the Morrison action run. And it's a better version of Superman as a larger than life myth than All-Star. Please don't kill me, he says. I found it such a breath of fresh air.
Okay.
Ralph took a huge breath.
All right. So I agree about Snyder. I
have to take a huge breath.
Yeah. I agree about working class hero Superman. I don't know if I can agree about All Star because All Star did something really special with the Silver Age aspect of Superman. I feel like.
Yeah. Here's the thing, like for Jan or for anyone who feels this way, like, oh, it's awesome. I'm glad you're enjoying it this much. And that it's risen to occupy this place in your hierarchy of Superman stories. I don't want to take away from that. Yeah, I don't agree. I guess as far as Superman as the working class hero, in fairness, as much as that was part of the jumping off point for the Morrison action run, we did then veer into other territory and all the vindictive.
Yeah, he didn't continue with that, but that image stuck with the people who read that. That image sticks with them, and like that was like, oh wow, that is what Superman was at the beginning. But he moved on very quickly, kind of like the comics did as well.
100%. So I do think what we see here as far as Superman Cal, I know they call him Superman, but he really pushes against that name. So I'll try to refer to him as Cal here. But
yeah.
Cal, he lives and works, or not even so much lives, but he works among the people in these impoverished areas who are being exploited and subjugated in these terrible working conditions, like the diamond mine. And so I feel like you do get more time in that space and more depth than you get in the Morrison run. So yeah, on that front, I guess I would agree. As far as the Snyder piece, I'm going to jump to a comment or a question from our pal Logan Crowley, who just joined me for one of our Brainiac episodes. He says, does anyone else feel like this series intentionally incorporates the tone and aesthetic of Snyder's Man of Steel? This series really felt to me like it was a lifeline to people who came into Superman with that iteration of the character.
See that?
So I've had these questions that I've been thinking about them. Yes, I see the shared DNA in terms of the setting, the world, the fact that we have in both the Snyder films and in the Absolute Universe, a darker, less accepting world. That to me feels like the shared DNA.
Yeah.
I think, I'm not putting words in Logan or Jan's mouth. I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like I do draw a line between the Clark in the Snyder films and the Cal that we get here. And I feel like there might be those who maybe weren't fans of the Snyder films or weren't picking up what Snyder was putting down, who might kind of lump these versions of the character together as being like darker, angrier, broodier versions. I don't see it that way, but I get why some might. But more than anything, I do think in terms of the worlds that these characters are being positioned in, yeah, I do think there's commonality there.
Yeah, for sure. And the Krypton has similar elements, minus some of the more like, no, it even had the moles. So it has like those Fantastic Beasts elements as well. So
yeah, just jumping back to what Jan said for a moment here. And I'm curious if this jumped out at you, the aspect of Absolute that felt the most Morrisonian to me, to coin a phrase, was when Cal is being held by Brainiac. And then we find out that he's been whispering at night to the Brainiac clones and has like subtly gotten through to them / reprogrammed them. That to me, that felt like a Morrison thing.
Very much so.
But otherwise, no, and like I said, I'm glad that folks like Jan are enjoying this so much. But no, to me, I would not put this above the Snyder films or All Star or the Morrison action run. But that's not to take away from this. It just doesn't quite rise to that level for me. But I'm glad it does. I'm glad it does for them.
I think it could sit amongst them. I think it definitely has a seat at the table along with those stories. If you were to do like a 12 Disciples of Superman books, I think this one might be amongst them.
Last couple of comments and questions here. Logan continues and says, and boy, do I agree with Logan here. Does it feel to anyone else like this Ra's al Ghul was supposed to be Vandal Savage? He aesthetically and ideologically has a lot more in common with Vandal to me. And though originally a Green Lantern villain, Vandal has much more commonly been depicted as a line-wide bad guy than Ra's has. Other than the name Lazarus for this corporation and the presence of the Lazarus pits themselves, I don't understand why this wasn't Vandal Savage.
I feel you on that. It is so much of Vandal, but I think they were referencing with the early Batman books when Ra's first appears, right? Because they wanted that son of the demon aspect. So I think they definitely merged the two. Maybe Ra's is also Vandal Savage, maybe that's something will get revealed later on. So like it's one of his many monikers he's had over the years.
Huh.
Um, as he's changed his name prior to, survive throughout the world, and so people don't catch on to his game. But I feel that. I think it is so much Vandal Savage, the power that he shows, I think they even have him at one point with the Mark of Cain, just like very quickly in one of the panels.
Yeah, this kind of annoyed me. I am a little sensitive because we just came off of our Brainiac coverage. And one of the things we talked about was my adventures with Superman and their take on Brainiac. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we have elements of Brainiac and Zod and Zor-El and Eradicator, like all smushed together there.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying the character wasn't used effectively in those specific stories, but it does kind of bother me when multiple villains are smushed together here. And so here, yeah, we've got aspects of Vandal and Roz, and with the kneeling business, even a little dash of Zod there. It's like, God damn it, stop. I feel like we have great villains. I just don't kind of love this commingling.
I kind of would like a streamlining of Vandal and Roz, because Roz has kind of taken this like pedestal. When if you go back to like the 30s, Vandal Savage is there fighting Alan Scott Green Lantern from issue 1 with them. And Vandal Savage is like truly like in a post or even like during the formations of fascism internationally, he was that businessman character that was working behind the scenes and manipulating things to have his immortal legacy always. And I feel like he's been minimized over the years, and Roz is kind of put on this pedestal. And so I would maybe kind of love a little commingling there of, so Vandal can kind of get his, place back as one of the greatest villains of all time.
100%. Or alternatively to your other suggestion, it's like, yeah, if you find out that one of them was the identity of the other one at some point over their long history, it's like, I might be okay with that. That's paging Jeff Johns.
Yeah. No, but then we'll get, Vandal Al Ghul, and then there'll be a whole like battalion of these immortals.
Amazing. Last couple here. Rick says, not really any questions, but I'm enamored with this title. I find the changes made to Superman in this telling to be quite riveting. I have every issue plus the first volume hardcover. I'm hoping that we'll have this version for a good while. And Mark M says, Absolute Superman has easily been one of my favorite titles since it started. I love this working man, champion of the oppressed take. I love the symbol being a reclaimed point of pride from its intended meaning. I love the new take on Krypton, and especially Jor and Lara. I like that it shows no matter if Kal had grown up with the Els or the Kents, he would have grown up to be a good person. That is not usually a version of the story we see. Rafa Sandoval is doing next level work, and now I think of him as a seminal Superman artist. Generally agree with all of that. And the art has been fantastic. One of the big things we have to talk about is this Krypton. And like I said earlier, I mean, this to me is far and away one of the highlights. To be perfectly honest, it's like I would have been perfectly content with just like a full-on Absolute Krypton series.
This is one of my favorite Kryptons ever. I was like, why is all the Sunstone red? And it didn't click to me that the Sunstone for the like what would be the Fortress of Solitude, which is clear or has our suns powering it, on a red sunned planet, all of the red sunstone is red. So I know that's such a silly thing, but it clicked while I was reading it. And I was like, oh wow, all of the sunstone is red. The fortress would be red on Krypton.
Yeah, absolutely. And just all the descriptions of the environment, like the blistering sun and the fact that they have these gemstorms where diamonds are whipping around.
Yeah.
And like we've seen in other iterations, the fact that they have so taken command of the environment to the point where they control the weather and schedule it at certain times and all of that. But far and away, what was the most interesting aspect of this was the social class system.
Yes.
On the planet here.
Right? I always loved that, even in Jeff Johns' thing where I don't know if it was first introduced there, but the Science Guild, all of those guilds were always super interesting to me. And I really love the politics of Krypton, and to see that expanded on and played with here, And, Darkseid doing such a number on Cal's reality that, his parents both were so outspoken that they were moved down to the class of Steel, the people of Steel, which is such a great moment as well in that first issue.
Yeah, I mean, this social hierarchy here, what this was most reminiscent of to me, I don't know if you ever watched, I forget if we talked about this, the sci-fi Krypton series.
No, but I've heard your praise of this show, so I have to check it out at some point.
To borrow a phrase from our pal Zach, Krypton is the blueprint. I mean, I have to imagine, I mean, maybe Jason Aaron totally came to this independently, but if he was like, oh no, sci-fi's Krypton was an influence here, I 1000% see it. Cause that dealt with the same setup as far as that social hierarchy and the fact that the Els had been stripped of their rank and were now among the rankless, right? That was the whole bit on that show. So here, in a similar way, we have the Science Guild at the top of society. We have the Law Guild, seemingly wearing the crest of Zod, right? That looked like the Zod symbol.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Unless I'm mistaken, but that's what it looked like.
That would make sense.
And we have,
if you just turn that around.
Yeah. And we have the laborers of that the Els belong to. And their crest is that traditional S symbol that we're so familiar with. So here it's not the crest of their family specifically, or the flag of Krypton, as we've seen in different stories, but it's the mark of this class of citizens on the planet, the laborers. Mm-hmm. And to the patron question or comment that we read, it's like, yeah, it's meant to be this mark of shame, but Jor-El and Lara have taught their son to wear it with pride and to turn it into something meaningful. Oh man. So I loved it.
Yeah. I loved all of that early Krypton stuff. You also get Clark growing up with Lara and Jor for the first time. And I'm sure, throughout the history, we've had moments where he's been with them, but I don't think we've ever directly seen him being raised, right?
Okay. So this is where people are going to be writing, and please do write in and let us know. I'm sure, there are plenty of, I'm thinking of pre-crisis stories. I'm sure there are loads of
right.
time travel or imaginary stories where it's like, oh, what if Superman grew up on Krypton? Or even something like For the Man Who Has Everything, where we get this kind of alternate look, or in the more modern era, although it's like 20 years old at this point, but the Godfall storyline, Joe Kelly and Michael Turner and Talent Caldwell, where you had Superman, he had amnesia and he was in the Bottle City, and it was as if he had lived there his whole life. So like we've gotten,
I remember that. Yeah.
Like we've gotten different spins on it. I don't want to say this is but I do, to your point, I agree. I was thinking the same thing. I feel like this is the most substantial and in-depth look at something like this that we've seen.
He's being directly raised by them. He's getting direct lessons from them. He's getting observations of their behavior to influence his behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love is that even though we have the Els in this lower class, so to speak, the fact that they were on a different path, that they got knocked off, right? Lara, when she was in school, she wrote this inflammatory essay about why Krypton should be exploring interstellar travel.
Yeah.
And lost her spot on the track that she was on. And Jor-El at his graduation gave this speech about the environmental recklessness of Krypton's policies and was kicked down to the Labor Guild. So the fact that they were on this track and they were not, I feel like that adds a dimension to this. It's funny. Initially, as I was starting to read this, I was saying to myself, generally I like the idea of the Els being more prominent, more renowned members of society, because I like the contrast that creates with the simple farm folk, the kindly couple who raise him on Earth. I like having that little point of contrast. But I found the scenes with Cal and Jor-El and Lara so resonant that it worked for me. But beyond that, the angle that they take here in Absolute Superman, I feel like it works really well, where Cal grows up in the Redlands. He's among the land, hands in the dirt. So when he ends up in Kansas with Jonathan and Martha Kent later on, he feels at home. So I love that point of connection. So yeah, that's a big departure. And that took me a little second, but I'm like, that's one of those changes that I'm like, okay, no, that's an interesting choice. And that feeds into this story that we're telling specifically here.
how often did you think of like the overall like meta story that's going on, like Darkseid?
Almost
Because
never.
okay, so the entire time I'm reading it, I know that like Darkseid has influenced the world. So I'm thinking of things in like the rules of apocalypse, and like the entire universe is playing at this like, if you have free thought, you get kicked down. If you have this, you like, so I'm kind of thinking about this like overall meta story, even like, I'm trying to keep it on its own thing, but you can't not feel that presence when, if you have a free thought, you're down at the bottom.
I think I'm glad you bring that up. And I feel like this is a strength of the story where, yeah, like as you're saying that, I totally agree. And that's definitely in line with what we know of Darkseid and the subjugation of free will and
Yeah.
promoting despair and all of that. So yeah, like if you're looking for that in this story, like you'll see it. But I think to the story's credit, and like I was getting at earlier, like you can read this in more of a vacuum.
Oh yeah,
and
it's invisible.
totally, yeah. So it's a very deft balance there. I have to say a couple of moments that just sang for me. One is this business about Cal as a student and how
AI.
and the AI, like students are expected to use generative copy from the Kryptonian luminarium, not to come up with their own work product. And Cal breaks from that. He writes his reports in his own words and gets in trouble at school.
And I love that moment where he like looks at his parents so sad and he goes, "But I like my words." And then they're like, "Don't stop."
That was, I don't know, man. That might have been my favorite moment of the entire thing, is when they're having that heart to heart with him about this situation at school.
Yeah.
And you're not sure exactly where it's going to go. In a traditional story, they would say, hey, you've got to fall in line. You've got to follow the rules, but not these two rebels, not Jorah and Lara, when they're like, keep it up. Oh my God. I'm like, you guys are the best. And then and so the other thing that I like about that is just the fact that no, we don't have Clark the reporter, at least not yet, but we have this idea of him and his words and telling his stories.
But on the train. So when he is traveling through Krypton and he sees what he is seeing naturally and he's finding his call to journalism in that moment, it makes like this whole storyline loves journalism and I love it. But it has like this journalism, not as a career, but as a calling throughout this story. And it's an unintentional discovery that Clark is doing this that gets him in trouble, as he's just traveling across Krypton.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've heard me say this so many times, but, I never like the version of the story where Clark is a reporter because it's a convenient cover and a way to hear about disasters. It's like, that's way too basic. Like I always want journalism to be something he cares about. Mm-hmm. And however we get there, I'm open to it. And we get there here. And I like that. My comic shop closed over a decade ago. But if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. As a movie lover and independent filmmaker myself, I appreciate the importance of great, well-run film festivals, and one family of fests has you covered in New York and New Jersey. Don't miss Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Round Reel in Bloomfield, and Shorts and Stout in Long Beach. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast.
I know, and I keep calling him Clark, but it is Cal. I got to remember in this, it's Cal.
Yeah, but again, if we go by that final page of 14,
that's true.
But I really like that aspect. But the other thing, and this was relatively minor, but man, I really glommed onto it when Jor-El and Lara, because of course Jor-El has determined, as is always the case, no matter what continuity we're in, poor Jor-El, always the bearer of bad news, whose warnings go unheeded. But he and Lara, they know that Krypton's days are numbered, and they're working on an escape plan. And by the way, I love that it's Lara who's the mechanical engineer, or the mechanic, the mechanical genius here. Jor-El is the geological engineer, the mechanic and the miner, right? Yeah, the mechanic and the miner. But I love that she's the one who has developed Soul, this artificial intelligence, and she's building the ship that is going to carry their family and cousins and neighbors off the planet. But there's this great moment when they're conferring / conspiring, and Lara has this line, I'm paraphrasing, but she's basically says like, look, I want to know that when they laugh you out of the science chamber and they come here and they try to take all of our stuff, that we're done trying to reason with them. And I'm like, yes.
Lara was great in this. When Clark goes to tell her after he witnesses like the police brutality on his own planet on Krypton, and he runs to Lara, and she's just ready with that Judge Dredd sized weapon.
I mean, that's the thing. Look, in terms of thematics, character, that moment of powerless, helpless Cal on Krypton, watching his father be dragged away when he's trying to deliver his warning.
Yeah.
You carry that directly to what Cal experiences on Earth and the brutality at the hands of the peacemakers.
Yeah.
Right. These shock troopers deployed by the Lazarus Corp who were shooting and killing people in the streets indiscriminately. Some really eerie and tough echoes of what we are experiencing in our real world. That's undeniable. But in terms of the character specifically here, it's like, yeah, you see that helplessness and then this opportunity that he has when he's on Earth to actually do something about it. But again, like we were saying before, to keep that rage in check, but it all connects beautifully.
But he's on Earth is trying to take as many steps as possible to avoid that violence at first.
Yeah.
He's working in secret. He's digging out the mines himself. He's making sure the people don't have to do the work, that he can take that on himself before anything else happens. And then you've got, the peacemakers who escalate it, and he has to act. And it just keeps, and he gets trapped in their game of escalation in that moment. And, there's one moment I wanted to bring up when he's, very Superboy-esque, and he's fighting the peacemakers, and he keeps saying, "It's all my fault. I'm sorry. It's all my fault." I just wanted to, remind you of the compilations from Smallville I used to send you. And I immediately thought of those.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I will talk more about the peacemakers and the real world parallels and all of that. Yeah. But I just, on that note, because jumping off a point that you made, it's like, we look at the champion of the oppressed Superman from that Morrison action run at the beginning, right? When he's out there on the balcony, rats with money. That's not what we get here, right? No. This is a Cal who is working in the shadows, in the darkness. Like you said, he's mining all of the diamonds for the workers. He's not necessarily out in front unless and until absolutely necessary. And even then, he's not necessarily a speech maker. I mean, one of the things that's consistent here from young Cal on Krypton on his Zoom classes, essentially, to the present day stories is how soft spoken he is. There are multiple instances where people are like, what did he say? Like, we can't understand him.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. And I guess kind of plays into when we think about those core qualities of all of the different facets of the Superman character and that mild-mannered quality of Clark Kent. So again, we were seeing so many of these ideas just sort of manifesting in different ways. One thing that plays out differently here on Krypton that I was kind of intrigued by is typically in the Krypton part of the story, Jor-El is trying to deliver his warning and is ignored. Here, initially, it seems like it's playing out similarly, but then you find out that, oh no, the Science Guild, they have taken it to heart and they're building their own spaceships. Yeah. Right. So they are actually taking action in a way that you don't typically see. But they're only saving themselves, the upper class of society. So, I mean, I feel like it just, I don't know, man, it packed an even more powerful punch here and sadly felt even more true to life.
There's so much of that throughout it. You know, you have Brainiac hiding away in a bunker. You know, there's little things that Aaron has put in that are, you know, prescient. You know, I'm reading these and I'm like, wait, when did he write this? And I would go and look back and it was back in November. It's not March. You know, it's not, I mean, not March, it's not, you know, January, it's November. It's earlier than we're experiencing some of these things right now. I mean, globally, they've been happening for forever, but for us here, we don't necessarily always see it firsthand.
Look, if I read, if I came to this series years from now and I wasn't exactly sure of publication dates,
yeah,
seeing all of the business with the peacemakers opening fire on the civilians,
yeah,
I would 1,000% think that it was written after the events in Minneapolis and beyond, right? Like, so yeah, that's why I say like, it's kind of, you know, eerie, and you're right to point out the timing of this. Yeah, I mean, it really just smacks you in the face. But anything else about the Krypton portion of the proceedings here that you want to talk about?
There was one thing, and it was, have we ever known I mean, I'm sure it's changed dozens and dozens of times, and there's all different versions, but 9 million light years from Earth. Did we ever know that before?
You want me to call up Mark Wade? Because I am sure maybe. He has the encyclopedic. Yeah, he can answer that. I don't know.
I'm sure there's dozens of different versions of that, but have you ever noticed it before? Have you ever noticed a variation on that before in all of your readings?
Never to the point where it registered with me. It might have been there, but
that unlocked a little bit of my love for astronomy, and it would be such a cool moment if Superman was able to see Krypton from Earth 9 million years ago.
Oh.
And he would still be able to see his planet not destroyed from Earth. You know, just a cool little heartbreaking moment that could exist in the comics at some point, if it doesn't already.
Interesting. Yeah, but I mean, like we were saying, I mean, this is, I think, the fundamental inversion of the traditional story, where normally Kal-El departs Krypton as a baby, maybe a toddler at the oldest, and then is raised by the Kents, whether or not one or both of the Kents die before he becomes Superman, but he has his upbringing with them. And here it's largely flipped, where he's spending those first, like we're estimating, 12, 13 years of his life on Krypton with these parents who are instilling these values in him. So I feel like a lot of kind of those core lessons that Superman learns, he is getting them, but now we actually see him getting them on Krypton.
Well, they're still out there, right? The parents.
Well, okay, that was actually something I was going to ask you, because I feel like certainly Cal's conclusion is that he's the only one who made it out, right? They're all, so refresh my memory, but they're all in that space
bigger
arc
spaceship, yeah,
that then gets hit, and then they're individual pods, right?
But is he the only one with soul? But I thought she developed multiple versions.
Yes. Yeah. Others have it. But there are a bunch that you see getting taken out, even when they're, because they do all have a version of soul, because we have like the little, you know, the voice activation. We see like those word bubbles pop up for a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Then there are a good bunch that we see take direct hits. Mm-hmm. But to my memory, I don't think we ever explicitly see Jor-El and Lara die. But I think certainly that's the implication. And I really think that's Cal's interpretation of what happened. But that was actually one of the things I was going to ask you. Do we expect at some point over the course of Absolute Superman to find out that Jor-El and Lara, or one of them, or some other survivor from Krypton actually did make it out?
For sure. And was the little girl he's talking to, was that meant to be Kara?
Maybe.
Yeah. He doesn't specifically say his cousin, but it's a little blonde girl and she's younger than him. But no, she'd be older than him, wouldn't she? On Krypton.
You know, it's absolute universe, man.
That's true. Things might
But, you know, it's funny, though. Part of me is like, yeah, I could see one of the Kryptonians showing up, but I don't know. I mean, this is Darkseid's world. I feel like that would be too, I don't know. Would that be too much hope to give the cat? I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know.
But no, there's some that are still out there, at least, which makes sense in just general Superman storytelling.
Yeah.
But I do, back to your question, I felt the time with the Kents was so minimal, but just as impactful as the time he would like if the time was swapped, right? So you always have this like very impactful moment, goodbye, and the football toss to Jonathan,
Right, yeah.
as you call it. But this time, that moment with Jonathan and Martha and how much it meant for them to have this guy to take care of.
Yeah.
And how helpful he was to the farm.
And I think, well, I guess it depends on the version we're talking about. Like if we're talking about the Jor-El and Lara of James Gunn's Superman, who sent him here to conquer and have a harem, as far as we know, maybe that's its own little pocket there, unless there's more to be revealed on that front. But generally, right, there is this rebellious aspect to Jor-El and Lara, especially in something like the John Byrne iteration. We're on this cold, sterile Krypton, but like they remove their son from the Matrix chambers and they touch hands in a society where physical contact is unheard of, right? Like it seems like something so small, but for that society, that was a huge break. So I feel like there's always some aspect of Jor-El and Lara being a bit apart from the rest of the folks on Krypton in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you see that here and it's really full blown, but I think it works. And yeah, again, except in certain instances where maybe there's a darker tinge to the Els or to Krypton generally, like I do always assume that Jor-El and Lara are good people. And if they had the time with their son, that they would raise him in a way in the most fundamental aspects, similar to Jonathan and Martha. Right. So to actually see that here play out. Yeah. I mean, I think it worked and that like made sense to me.
For sure.
Now more to say on the Kents and all that, but on this note of soul, this artificial intelligence that Lara designs, and that is essentially, I don't know how you would describe it, but kind of infused into the dust of Krypton, the ashes of Krypton that form Cal's cape.
Yeah.
Right. How much mileage did you get out of this relationship between Cal and Soul?
I think it was the same as, Gary, like it's the Superman robots or
Gary's a name too.
I'm blinking on
like Helix.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like Helix?
Yeah, exactly. It's that similar. I didn't put it further than that. I think it's almost the exact same, entity.
Okay. I came around on Soul. At first, I was saying to myself, you know what? If we're doing no fortress, no family, no home, don't give him the AI. Like really let him be out there on his own. He doesn't need to be taught.
He doesn't need a friend.
Yeah, he doesn't need to be taught the language by this AI or what have you. But then, right, as we get deeper into the story here, and Soul expresses regret or apology for not delivering on his prime directive, right? Yeah. That Cal ended up being alone. And Cal says no. And we get this great, montage of all of the things that Soul has done for him in terms of teaching him, protecting him, guiding him. And Cal says, like, I was never alone. And that to me harkens back to that moment from the Morrison Batman run that I'm constantly quoting about, the first truth of the Batman, the saving grace. I was never alone.
Yeah.
So that relationship and the fact that carrying this all the way through, Soul is infiltrated by Brainiac's programming and then sacrifices, I say himself, but sacrifices itself in order to take down Brainiac's death trap. And that really landed with me in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. So I wasn't really that keen on it from the jump, but it grew on me.
It was programmed by Lara, so it's elements of her. It's the last thing that he has from his mom, and that, he feels that for sure.
Yeah. I have to say, I do love when we get to Kansas, the parallel between Jonathan and Martha talking about the lack of rain, right? And we find out that there are drones in the sky programmed by the Lazarus Corp to deprive them of rain because they won't sell their farm.
Well, at first we don't know that,
right?
Because Martha is a rabid conspiracy theorist, and she's right, but I love it.
Yeah. It's, in a way that kind of calls back to Superman Birthright, where Martha was the one who was like investigating Area 51, and Wade has talked about how he had these other ideas for stories of Clark and Martha when he was a kid, like breaking into Area 51, like trying to learn more about aliens on Earth and things like that. So it was actually kind of reminiscent. But yeah, them, kind of longing for rain and questioning why they haven't experienced any, right? Goes right back to what we saw on Krypton in the Redlands when Martha was fixing the harvester of the farmer. And, there's all this business about paying for rain at certain times and things like that. So
I think it truly makes the concept of exploitation and dehumanization and environmentalism and class, all of that, like at the forefront, that it's not an individual thing. It is a global thing. It's it's universal. That's what I was going. Not, and so the exploitation of people. I wrote down these 4 things that are I think throughout. It's class, environment, exploitation, dehumanization. And throughout the story, those are the 4 things that I feel Aaron really focuses on thematically. And for Cal to land at this time, at the beginning of his parents' story, at the same point, is so key to him being able to make that difference because he knows the signs now.
Yeah. I mean, I think seeing those issues as they're presented on Krypton and then seeing the parallels on Earth, really resonates. And I think, speaks to unfortunately, the timelessness of a lot of these struggles and the universality of it. And then obviously again feeds into Cal. I'm doing it too. Clark's whole journey of being in this position of seeing the people of this new world, right, falling into the same traps and patterns that he experienced on his home world.
Yeah.
So no, I think all of that really resonates. Like we said, we don't get a ton of time with Jonathan and Martha, but they do take Cal in as he's recuperating and his powers are manifesting. And at first they don't understand each other, but then when Soul wakes up, is able to help Cal learn the language.
Take out those drones and you get that rain.
Yeah. And I loved the sequence where Jonathan and Martha each individually, separately, thank Cal for saving the other one. Right. Talking about the effect, Jonathan talking about the effect that Cal's presence had on Martha, and then Martha doing the same, talking about what his presence has meant for Jonathan. I loved it.
So good. And unfortunately then someone from town reports the immigrant.
Yeah. I will say, again, one of many instances where, we see these connection points to the real world as we speak. But I really liked how that guy who reported them for this immigration violation, ultimately, is part of the group during the battle of Smallville Underground, who steps up and apologizes, admits what he had done, and apologizes. And, Cal shows some mercy and gives him a role, as a, it was very fitting where he's like, you've got a good eye, like you'll be our night guard or whatever.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it's super important that he did that. I think it's part of his journey of the nonviolence almost. I know he has to commit violence, but in that moment he says, I could have crushed his hand and he wanted to. Any of us in that position would probably do that thing, but we have a what would Superman do moment now. And what would Superman do? He'd accept this person who probably destroyed the family he never will ever get to have, and he accepts him into the fold and he gives him a job and he helps him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, I wasn't thinking about the dark side of it all as I was reading it, but I feel like here's another instance of that, of Darkseid's will, being made real, because it's like, he's he lands on the Kent farm, right? Like this could have been a whole different path for him had he been able to stay there and learn more about Earth and really become a part of their family. But no, he gets reported to immigration, and the troops show up, and it's such a heartbreaking moment where Jonathan and Martha tell him to go.
Yeah.
What's your read on their motivation in that moment in terms of protecting themselves versus protecting him versus telling him to leave so that he won't hurt the troop? Like what do you think is really fueling that please go?
I think all of it. I think, we know the Kents outside of this story, but presented with how they were, they're pretty comics accurate across the board. I mean, you even brought up that they were touching on conspiracy theory from, Birthright. So we know that the Kents are always thinking of others before themselves for the most part. And I think that's where that has to have landed. I mean, they are in a moment of panic. We've seen so many of these moments of panic now that we shouldn't be watching almost all the time. And we see how these things are just acting on emotion and reaction. And they said to go because they wanted him to be safe. I don't think they were thinking of anything else.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally that's where I land as well. But yeah, it's such a heartbreaking scene. And then, carrying the heartbreak forward, staying on the thread of the Kents, we catch up with Martha in the present day, right? 5 years later, she's in a nursing home and suffering from dementia. And it's so heartbreaking. And there are moments where Cal tries to visit and she doesn't recognize him and she leaves, but really culminates in such an emotional moment where Cal returns there at the very end of the story. And unfortunately, Martha had passed away overnight, but she had made something before she did. Right. And we end with Cal holding up this makeshift Superman costume.
I nearly lost it there. Like I turned that page and I choked up. It was such a good moment.
Yeah. And the note includes him as part of their family and actually, right, renames him Clark.
Names him. Yeah.
Yeah. That was definitely, to me, a surprising aspect of this series because going in, like I said, I wasn't reading this along the way. I was hearing about how much people were enjoying it, but I, for the most part, was avoiding spoilers. So I went into this pretty open, not knowing what I was going to get. And just knowing the basic setup and the fact that we were spending as much time on Krypton as we were, I didn't know if the Kents were going to be part of the story at all. To be honest, if you had asked me, I probably would have said, no, I don't think they're part of this. So to get them and then to get that emotional payoff at the end, really, really landed.
For sure. I think you also see Brainiac for the first time at the farm, right? Or at least him in a silhouette as he's manipulating things from the back. What do you think about that design? It's very Clive Barker-esque, Hellraiser, very, I enjoy it.
Yeah. So we touched on this Brainiac briefly when we did our recent Brainiac coverage, but we didn't go too deep into it because I'm we're going to be doing an absolute Superman episode. We'll talk about it there.
Okay.
So yeah, this Brainiac, and he gets issue 7, right, as a spotlight on
his
or 6 or 7.
Yeah,
his backstory, right? We find out how he came to be. And essentially this Brainiac is part of a Brainiac collective of, I'm curious what your read on this is. I guess clones that are comprised of some organic and some cybernetic parts. They didn't seem to be fully one or the other.
I don't know if they're clones. I think my brain just obviously goes to Rick and Morty, which explores all of this nonsense, but it's there is Brainiac and probably Coluans as well. And these are the remnants of that, or at least one Cluan who has, is the Brainiac we know, but to maintain his ship, he has all of these clones of himself, and that's where the numbers come in. And then, there's obviously now a exploitative class system there as well.
Well, that's the thing. Regardless of the exact makeup composition of these Brainiacs, but yeah, the parallels between the class system on Krypton versus what we see here in Brainiac's backstory, fascinating because just like the Els were part of the labor guild, here too, our Brainiac is a laborer. Yeah. Right. He's activated. So all these Brainiacs are part of this collective and they each have their function. And Our Brainiac's function is to shovel the remains of the other Brainiacs into the liquidator.
Yeah.
That's
body
his sole
disposal.
function. That's all he's programmed to know or to do.
And
And
it drives him mad.
drives him mad, right? And there's this bit where one of the seemingly deceased Brainiacs that he's shoveling is actually still alive and attacks him, right? It seems to stab him in the head, which I think definitely twists him up as he starts to lose it a little bit. But then eventually the bodies stop, right? He doesn't have any more bodies to shovel, and he breaks his way out and explores the rest of the ship and finds the lead Brainiac sitting there dead in his chair with a gun. The implication seems to be he killed himself, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like it. I don't see any other, maybe to defend himself, but it ultimately ends with that, which if you think about, history of people exploiting people, where they usually end up.
Yeah. And then so our Brainiac, who's number 400,000, whatever, now positions himself as Brainiac 1 and ultimately makes his way to Earth and is in cahoots with Ra's al Ghul. But yeah, I mean, physically, yeah, we have this. He's really like a Frankenstein of a creature with these mechanical legs. And the body horror aspect is definitely a new spin on Brainiac. And we see him conducting experiments on his victims. The Brainiac as an evil surgeon, that to me kind of calls to mind the Justice series.
I remember that.
Remember that? Where it was like a kind of like a modern spin on Super Friends, but I just remember that imagery. Alex Ross co-wrote it, and I think he painted over another artist's pencils, if memory serves. But yeah, I just remember that imagery of Brainiac in the surgical coat, the lab coat, right, with the scalpel. So yeah, I mean, and this is definitely a more, I've been talking about this at length over recent episodes, but I like the cold, calculating Brainiac. This is a more demented iteration of the character. I think it works, but yeah.
This reads almost similar to how Kevin Smith was writing him a little bit, minus the TV references. I feel like he's a little bit more kooky and out there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's traditional in the sense of being this collector of the bottle cities and all of that.
Which, like, what's going on there? They're constantly screaming. So then you've got, again, like that dark side parallel of like these like flaming cities. And
I do like the way Brainiac is initially introduced as this algorithm.
Yes,
that's part of the Lazarus Corp, and how has a mind of his own, and clearly is not listening as Lois is delivering her after action report. And then Chris Smith, one of the peacemakers, talking about what happened. And Brainiac is just putting his own spin on it.
I know it's, I think there's a parallel for some people we might know in the world with this Brainiac who control an algorithm and a media company and spin things.
Yeah. And hear what you want to hear and see what you want to see. And and just sort of reframe or just outright twist objective reality.
And speaking of peacemakers, it's interesting that the trajectory that this character has had, I feel like, because of James Gunn. And now Peacemaker was the parallel for the comedian, right? So they wanted to use Peacemaker as the comedian. So imagine in that alternate universe what this would have done for that character, how people think about the comedian as he is. I'm not sure if Jason Aaron asked for him. I know we didn't ask for Peacemaker to be this big thing, but I enjoy it. It's just this bizarre choice in character that's become so popular. If it was required of him to put it in because Peacemaker and Superman are kind of the two top things right now, so they need to, or if Aaron wanted him in there. But what he did, I think, is absolutely brilliant. I know that, post John Cena Peacemaker, you do have Chris Smith, and you have this character who is like a perfect example of a fascist kind of like chud. Like he's got this whole, his arc, if you were to say, like, if you were to, take his toy out and explain it to someone, is this guy wants to do good, but he wants to follow rules that are given to him by stronger people. But ultimately he wants to do good, but he's really dumb and doesn't always do good. And I think, like, if you were to explain it like a child, like, that's kind of who Peacemaker would be. So to put him in that position of like stormtrooper, to put it nicely, is
the Peacemakers are the ICE agents of this story. I mean, like, that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Yeah.
Yeah. They are, they are those fascist, jackbooted thugs carrying out orders and not caring about another human being, you know? And to put his character there, once again, going back up to Darkseid, like as someone who wants to do good, he's in no position to ever actually accomplish that, which, I felt bad for him, but I don't feel bad for what they do or what those characters are. You're part of that group. You're not good.
Yeah. I mean, a few things. So one, yeah, that's interesting as far as, I don't know. And I don't know if Aaron has talked about this, but whether, he specifically wanted to use the Peacemakers and Chris Smith or was asked to, I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, given the prominence of the character in the James Gunn cinematic universe, it's, he's instantly recognizable. The name, certainly. I mean, it's one of those things where I really was not familiar with the character at all before the Peacemaker TV show and the Suicide Squad and all of that. So it's like, absent that, this wouldn't have really registered with me at all, I don't think.
Yeah.
So, whether it was a request or a happy coincidence or whatever, it played well. Cause like now I kind of have that built-in familiarity, even though this is obviously a different version of Christopher Smith, but it's like, okay, no, like I have a frame of reference for who this is supposed to be or who he could be. And yeah, I mean, I think your description of him and the Peacemakers is apt. And yeah, we got to this point where he opens fire on these innocent civilians. But I think where maybe there can be some sympathy or empathy, going back to what I was saying before with the Brainiac algorithm, is like when Christopher Smith is giving that after action report. I mean, I have to go back and look at the scene again, but I feel like he recognizes how messed up he is.
Yeah.
And Brainiac
he's told,
just puts him
you're
right
doing
back.
great. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's something we have to consider about our reality as well. I don't think the people who are, I'm not trying to give sympathy for them, right? Like, I'm very firmly fuck ice, basically, just to put it nicely. But I think we have to remember that there are human beings there as well that are also being exploited. They are not the end game, right? They are at the very bottom of the exploitation pyramid control part of the pyramid, not the people who are being exploited, but they are the very bottom rung of the pyramid of exploitation on the control side.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I'm really jumping ahead to the end here, but we do get to this point after this massive battle in Smallville where the Peacemakers are ordered to slaughter these Smallville citizens who are there trying to hold their ground and their defend their home. And one of the guys, one Peacemaker's like, hey, like I'm from Oklahoma. Like I didn't sign up to kill our fellow citizens.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things. It's like, it was refreshing to see in that fictional context.
Yeah.
And I hope that sentiment is present among some in the real world, because it was one of those things where it's like, thank you. Like that somebody had the clarity to actually like step up and do the right thing and speak up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I feel it. I feel it in the breeze that something like that is going to have to happen, or it's going, something has to break here. And I think hearing about things like them not getting paid, which is common for anything that Trump does, I think that moment, I'm a firm believer in Grant Morrison saying what is written in comics will reflect in the real world at some point. And I think, and I hope at least that moment will come, because there are bigger things that we have to worry about.
Look, generally we don't get too political here, not because I don't have my views and not because I'm afraid to say them, but more, I just, for me, and I think for the audience, this is a much needed break from the horrors that we're often going through. But what I will say is that if there are any folks, let's see how I phrase this. If there are any folks who have no problem with what they're seeing in our society currently, who are fans of this run, I really hope that something clicks.
Yeah.
Because I think as you're reading this, it's very clear what is trying to be conveyed. And I would hope if there's anyone who has no problem with what they're seeing, I would hope if they read this, something shifts. I'll say that.
Fiction isn't always just fiction. I'm one of those people that thinks existence is political. So,
But look, I mean, that the scene where Agent Lane has intervened and handcuffed herself to Cal, and then they're surrounded by the peacemakers and their guns are drawn on them. And you just see them go down the line of like, oh, he's not surrendering. Oh, he's going to attack. Oh, he says he's going to hurt her. Boom. And then they open fire.
mm-hmm.
All right. The thing is, if I have one true complaint, and I guess we were getting at this before, I feel like the peacemaker side of things, the subjugation, the exploitation of the workers in the mines and other areas that we see, it's so compelling. And then I feel like it gets reduced to something awfully basic when it comes down to Ra's al Ghul wanting Cal to be his son.
Well, I know this will sound, what I'm about to say will sound so conspiracy theory, but you have to believe me that I am not a conspiracy theorist. If you were to look up stuff about Epstein, you will find out not just him, other people of that type. I mean, you can look at Richard Branson and all of these people who are looking for the fountain of youth for themselves, who are trying to build spaceships to leave this planet. They ultimately want to create a perfect being that is from them for the point of legacy. And I did buy that from Roz. Once again, I think it'd have been better from Vandal because that really aligns with him, especially, since he got his, abilities from a meteor and his, greatness from a meteor. And now he saw this child from a meteor. But if that character was just supposed to be the top of that pyramid, that is what all of these billionaires want. Ultimately, they want to have a legacy. They want to be remembered as gods.
Okay. I think that's fair. I mean, yeah, no, honestly. Yeah. Again, because I guess my initial read is like, there's some really interesting ideas here. And then it devolves into kind of more traditional superhero fare. But no, I don't know. I think you might be right. It might just be like, just a comic book, a comic book spin on something that is, is a real world.
And it's like, I really had trouble with it. I was reading it and I was like, why does he want him specifically? Like, why does he want him to be his son? And then I was like, oh, okay, that Batman story, like that early Batman story, he wants Batman to be his son-in-law. It's the same situation. It's that same, traditional, first story from him. So that makes sense. So that clicked. And then I was like, yeah, but it really does feel like I did have that, like, it does feel like Vandal Savage. And I was like, okay, but maybe Vandal Savage is Ra's. And so then I was able to kind of like reconcile that. And so, but ultimately, like, he is the top of the pyramid. Like, I mean, he's been that character. If you once again go all the way back to the 30s and read that first appearance of Vandal Savage in that Alan Scott Green Lantern, you'll see it. It's there. And I read that like I found the Holy Grail. Like when I first read that comic, I was going through it and I was like, oh my God, Vandal Savage is doing like what all of these like people are doing now, these robber barons. What?
Yeah, I've never read that debut story. I'll have to go check that out, but
it's worth it. Those issues are meaty, so they take a little while longer than normal comics to get through, but
no, listen, I appreciate your perspective. Honestly, I think you might have helped me reconcile that a bit. Because like I said, I think if there was one aspect where I found this a little lacking is kind of what the ultimate plot was on the part of the villain. But yeah, I think that maybe helps overcome it a little bit.
How much more ridiculous does it make the exploitation seem that that's all that it's for?
Huh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's another way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
a little, this is, more plot specific, but, as far as the Omega Men, right? This group that seems to be operating, against the Lazarus Corp, then turns out to be run by Talia, who's in league with her father. Did you see that coming? Were you surprised? Like, what'd you make of all that?
I thought it was Talia. It kind of reminded me of what was it? The Bane reveal from like the similar thing happened with in the Robin and Batman situation. I never came into contact with the Omega Men before this. I've always heard of them, but I don't think I've ever read anything with the Omega Men specifically. Have you?
No. I know there was Tom King did a miniseries a few years ago that I haven't read, but I know of it. No, I can't say I've really encountered them much along the way.
So I thought it was smart, and I hope they carry this into mainline DCU to have them have ties to Darkseid again. You know, they are the controlled opposition. I'm assuming, you know, Roz chose them as Omega because he's getting his, you know, cosmic download from Darkseid, and you know, to have them as this controlled opposition to the peacemakers that are there to help escalate things faster for them to make their choices is an interesting choice. And it does seem like something Jimmy would end up getting wrapped up in, you know.
Oh, poor Jimmy. Yeah. But I do like how we meet Agent Lane in this,
Yes.
where she's working for Lazarus, and Jimmy, who's part of the Omega Men. So they're on opposite sides, but their shared interest in and protection of Cal brings them together. And like we were saying before, that even though they're not in their traditional fields at the beginning of this, you have Lois writing her reports and then later broadcasting from occupied Smallville, and Jimmy becoming a better photographer along the way, right? He talks about how he was initially not good with the camera, right? They said he had 3 thumbs.
The light's shining through from the bottom.
Yeah. So I like that. And I think what you see definitely with Lois and with Jimmy and our other characters too, like I was saying before, is just the effect that Cal has on those around him. And especially the opening of one of the issues where Lois is going around and she's interviewing all of the people
who've encountered him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reminded me very much of that, you know, unfortunately, Scott Snyder, you know, how the people saw Superman as like this figure that was mythic, you know.
Wait, Scott or Zach?
I mean, sorry, Zack Snyder. That's what I meant.
Yeah, but it definitely had echoes of that of in Man of Steel, like where Lois is traveling the world following Clark's footsteps and interviewing people who met him along the way, and he's just this shadow, this ghost who doesn't stick around, but he's there to help people. You know, we were talking about this, right? But all this boils down to Roz trying to get Cal to give in to his rage and to kill, right? That's the final test that will mean he's ready to be the son of the demon. And Cal never crosses that line.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. There are flashbacks to Cal's upbringing on Krypton, right? And those, what were they called? Not mole rats, but mole rats, or those creatures in the mines.
Yeah, they were. I thought it was mole rats.
Maybe it is mole rats. Yeah. And Jor-El's relaying the story to Cal about how reluctantly he had to kill them to save the other miners there.
Yeah.
But there's this lesson about how, and refresh my memory on this. Maybe you have a sharper memory of the exact verbiage, but I think the point that Jor-El was conveying was that, like, it's not necessarily right per se, right? Like, what was the gist of what he was conveying to him in that moment?
I don't have it right offhand. I left that moment feeling that Jor-El was like, it's okay in the right circumstance. That's what I got from their conversation. That's what my sense memory is giving me from that conversation. What about for yours?
I mean, I guess maybe the gist of it that, I think Jor-El recognized that was what he needed to do in that moment, but I still don't know that he would characterize it as right per se.
It's the comic book version of the trolley question. Right. Save one or many.
Yeah. But I guess, I think about that moment. And obviously we've had a few references here already to Snyder's Man of Steel, and I won't belabor this point because we have talked about it before, but it's still, I'm sure this wouldn't have made much of a difference for some folks, but I think it would have helped a lot for others. In the original Man of Steel screenplay, there were flashbacks to young Clark and Jonathan on a hunting trip where there was an injured animal and they had to put the animal down. And I mean, I've never read the full scene. But I think the gist of it was Jonathan sort of talking about when an act like that is necessary or even merciful.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would have really gone a long way. As much as I am a defender of Man of Steel, like, I cannot deny the fact that when you watch that movie as it is, there's no setup to Clark being forced to make that specific choice. And then, of course, we don't really get the unpacking of it afterward that I think would have been helpful. And it always kills me that scene, it was cut from it was never even filmed as far as I know.
Yeah.
But it always bums me out because it's like, well, that would have been set up for that moment. And at least it would have been clear what the movie was trying to say, whether or not you agreed with it.
Yeah. Now that I hear that, like, I enjoy that element of like him seeing Zod as a wounded person. Like, he's wounded, he's suffering. And then it becomes an act of mercy and not an act of murder.
Yeah. And so like, that's what I'm saying. That's why it kills me that they didn't film that, because it's like, that I feel like that would have, like I said, people might've still disagreed with it, but at least you would have had more of a sense of what the movie was trying to say in that moment. And unfortunately, absent that, it's a little tough. I still love the movies, but there is a little bit, and that's what I was thinking of as I was reading this scene with Jor-El and Cal and talking about needing to kill those mole rats in the mine. What else haven't we talked about yet?
I like the League of Shareholders. I think that was a fun concept. And like, we're naming the real villains very plainly in place of the fictional arbitrations we had put in place to tell the morality stories to kids. Like, we're just naming it very plainly of who is really causing all of the damage. And I think the Kryptonite sword is a legendary relic now that has to exist in mainline.
We were talking about Soul, the AI, but the whole idea of his cape being the dust of Krypton or the ashes of Krypton. Do you like that?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't have any effect on me. I know, like, we have Kryptonite and all the different versions of that, so it should have some kind of effect. But I guess if it's not corrupted Kryptonite, like what was coming from the Earth, like that toxic kind of formations, I think it works. It didn't bother me too much. How about for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I have that strong of an opinion. I guess I feel similar. Like, it didn't bother me per se. At the same time, I'm not like, oh, it's us. It's funny because I was telling my 6.5-year-old son earlier, I was like, hey man, I read this comic. Like, it's like a different version of Superman. I'm like, his cape is dust. It's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. To answer the question I posed to you, I was only mildly surprised by the Omega Men twist, because there was some tell in one of the issues, I think, where Roz was like, give the signal, and then the next thing we saw was the Omega Men arriving, and I was like, I don't think that's an accident that those two things were happening right after each other.
Yeah.
But to your point, though, about them being the controlled opposition, and it's like, again, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's just like groups being in cahoots, right? And all of that. I don't know. So that tracked in its own way as well.
Yeah, for sure. That Battle of Kansas, it's scary that was, that came out in November, and we're on the cusp of that. There's one, I cannot believe how measured people are being, and we're still being called radical terrorists, and people are not giving them what they want. It's, And then to have that iconic Action Comics #1 Superman lifting a vehicle image right there too. He lifts that tank just like, that cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's something. But yeah, I mean, they full on occupy this town. They force people into these camps, and we have our opposition forces underground. I love that we got Lana. We got Lana Lang at the diner.
Yeah,
and that was great how that played out with Lois and Jimmy. Right, where Lana and the other diner patrons, they recognize them, and at first it seems like they're going to give them the cold shoulder, and they don't have any money to pay for their food. But then everybody steps up because they're like, no, we know what you've done for Cal. And Smallville knows Cal, because even though his time there was brief, like, he's continued to keep an eye out, and he's saved the people from these various disasters. And so they all step up to feed Lois and Jack. I thought that was a great moment, and it was nice to see Lana there, and then part of the action for the Battle of Smallville.
Absolutely. I love that moment as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we've hit on the most salient aspects of this. I mean, where do you hope it goes from here, this series?
Ooh, I thought that was it, but I know that they're continuing it. But
Yeah.
I would love to see more of them discovering more about the control system that is in place, right? We're on like the earthly side of those things, right? So I don't think, these power figures are all over. I think even Joker is very similar to what Ra's is for Batman over in Gotham. He's also a billionaire who is gene splicing and doing crazy things from what I've heard. I don't know all of the details, but that all of these heroes eventually find themselves and then make their way up to Darkseid is what I assume is going to go down, as usually does across DC's in between the reboots. There's this overall storyline that's always occurring in DC where, Darkseid reveals himself, heroes get to Darkseid, world resets based on whoever defeated Darkseid.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm curious, we had a question about how independently this can be read. And obviously right now I would say very independently. I don't know, as we build towards the next phase of the All In initiative, it's like, I don't know as far as crossovers and how and where and when this will culminate. I don't know.
It always gets complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I know, I know. I feel like probably the next time we reconvene and we talk about like the next batch, like, oh man, it was so better when you could just read this on its own or with its own thing. So yeah, I'm curious about that. I wouldn't mind seeing more aspects of the Superman mythology, even if they are spun in a completely different way. I mean, Ra's al Ghul was a very specific pick for a Superman story. Obviously, you had Brainiac in there, but yeah, I would be happy to see more of the characters and settings and concepts of traditional Superman lore, even spun in a completely different way. So that's what I would hope and expect to see.
That makes sense.
I guess the last thing I would say is that one of the things I'm struck by most looking at this reimagined different version of my favorite character is what's undeniable. And it's like, you can plop him on the Kent farm, but then drive him from it, right? We see him trying to just live by mountains and volcanoes, like removed from society, but that's not sustainable either. We see him trying to help surreptitiously in the mine, right? But at the end of the day, it's about what you do. It's about action, right? Like there's that moment where he has to intervene and even against the wishes and the directives of Soul, his AI companion, right? Who I guess Soul doesn't want him to live alone, removed from society, but also doesn't want him necessarily to try to save this world, right? Yeah. I mean, I think he explicitly conveys the idea that like some planets can't be saved. Like Krypton was an example of that. And perhaps Earth is here as well. But that ultimately he has to get involved and he has to take that action, especially on a world that he wasn't raised on, right? That there's just something undeniable about that. So yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to see all of this play out.
Yeah. I think it was a really impactful story on its own. I would offer it to a comic book fan, wouldn't offer it to a first-time Superman fan, but yeah. I think it's definitely, as I said before, sits at that table of great Superman stories.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, no, this was, I'm glad to finally dive into this. Like I said, I appreciate everybody's interest and wanting to hear us talk about it. And yeah, we'll check in on the series again, maybe in another year or so after the next major arc is completed. But this was a blast, man. Thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation. What do you want to share with people about Kill Me Kate?
Kill Me Kate's new stuff is out. The music is up and on Spotify, Tidal, Apple, all of it. You could search Kill Me Kate and you'll find it. You can find me on social media at Ralph Puma everywhere. I am not on it though. I have deleted all of the apps right now. I am very limited. If you need to find me, and you know who I am, you can reach out. But that's where I'm at right now when it comes to socials.
All right. Well, listen, it won't be too long before I activate my father box and summon you again for another discussion. So thank you, Ralph. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Keep tuning in. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.